Hello and welcome to another video. Today I have something a little different for you, a crafting video. So join me as I design, sculpt, and electrify my very own kesh, as seen on Stargate of course. If you're interested in learning basic prop making, including how to integrate LEDs, this is the video for you. So let's get started in making a ribbon device fit for a Goa'uld queen. I decided to start with the most important part, the jewel that focuses and projects the hand device's energy. You know, the one that does this. Ouch. Anyway, for this I used resin. This brand calls for a mixture of 50% resin, 50% hardener. I simply mixed them together, trying to minimize bubbling, and then added a generous helping of resin dye. Then it was simply a matter of pouring it into the mold, smacking it against the floor to get out some more of the bubbles, and letting it cure. While it was curing, I started on the jewel housing. This I made from 5mm EVA foam for structural support, covering it with zebra for the decorative element. The foam allowed for a nice snug fit of the jewel and minimized light spillage from the later installation of the LEDs. It also kept the prop as light as possible. Speaking of the jewel, you can see just how much I carved away to get it down to size. Of course, this left the surface a little dull even after copious sanding, so what you see me doing now is using a glossy nail top coat to add the shine back. While that was drying, I could move on to the electronics. This is the primary component, a single high-powered LED with a built-in aluminum heatsink. Because this LED is rated for 3.8 volts, a 3.7 volt rechargeable lithium-ion battery was my power source of choice. The circuit was exceptionally simple: switch, LED, and battery. Sometimes a circuit can be effective and, more importantly, safe with this level of simplicity.
So, as you can see, the glamour of crafting never stops in the way that I'm wearing, jeans that have, this is actually melted zebra on it, believe it or not. In kind of the spirit of showing how many times a design will adapt, this is the second version of the jewel housing. So this jewel housing originally was twice the depth. Now the issue with that is that makes it stand up from the palm quite a lot, and I actually don't want that because in a kesh the jewel lays down to the palm quite flat. So what I want to do is I want to make the housing just this thin. The issue is that here's our circuit, and you can see that the LED does not fit in there. So the LED would stick up a little from the back. And the thing is that LED really has to live very, very close to that because this has a heat sink on the back. This gets unbelievably hot. So what I'll be doing is I'll actually be putting on something to absorb that heat and protect from the heat, but this part gets incredibly hot and this is going to be living near my palm. So I really can't have this sitting on my palm because it will burn me. The reason why we want that heat sink is to dissipate that heat, but I have never used LEDs that have gotten quite that hot before. It is quite a high powered LED. So what I'm going to have to do is on the reverse side of the gem, I'm going to actually have to drill out a little bit. I don't need to do anything in order to dull up the back to diffuse the light. In a kesh, it's actually so bright that I'm struggling to look at it, which is awesome. That's exactly what I want. In a kesh, there is a pinpoint of light in the center. That's just how that works. And you can see just how bright that is, right? That's just one LED.
Next up, the finger caps. This was by far my least favorite part. Wasn't particularly challenging, merely a pain. But the process was as follows. First, I cut a zebra rectangle to the vague shape of my finger. Then I bent it around the finger, heating as I went. With it secured, I could heat the thermoplastic to a putty-like consistency and mold it to the correct shape. After that, I cut each cap down to a tapered point. And then it was time to sand each piece down. This part is essential to ensure the paint will stick, as well as to give a nice smooth finish. But it's a lot. Here's my tip for sanding. Sand each piece until you think you've done twice as much as you need, and then you're only halfway done. Time to paint now. To make it look as much like metal as possible, I used gilding wax, or Goa'uld wax if you prefer. This is an easy product to use. You simply rub it on, let it dry a bit, and then buff it to a shine. I like to work in thin layers, building the depth of shine and colors slowly. Here was the result of the gilding wax on the caps and the jewel housing. I'm quite pleased with that shine, I must say.
So, I'm having a little bit of a problem with something. I'm going to try to include more of the problems that I'm having so that people see that cosplay is all about having problems and solving them. So this is a small piece of zebra. Zebra is my thermoplastic of choice. I actually really dislike working with thermoplastics. As a matter of fact, I don't like prop making. It remains to be seen why I'm doing this. So the thing about thermoplastic is that thermoplastic is malleable. You should be able to comfortably bend your thermoplastic all the way in half like this, and you can see it's starting to crack a little bit here, but it shouldn't crack, right? And the point of that is that as you heat it up, you're going to be able to bend it even more. I found I had bought 3 giant sheets of Fibra, and the first sheet, absolutely fine, great, loved it. Second sheet, as I cut into it and was starting to work with it, I would bend it around my finger and it would do this, right? I'd be like, oh, okay, right? That's not acceptable, right? Thermoplastic should never do that. If I take this and bend this in half, nope, should never happen. So I'm a little bit peeved by that, and that is certainly slowing my progress, but it's a work in progress, and you know what? It's all about learning things.
Fighting my thermoplastic all the while, I started making the rings for each finger. I ended up remaking these later on, but since I did it almost exactly the same way both times, this footage will suffice. This was a matter of bending each band of Fibra to shape, then trimming it down to the correct size. In my original design, the wires running from the finger cap to the jewel housing went under each ring, so you can see me fitting that here. Later, however, you will see a change to this design element. But what I didn't change was the amount of sanding I had to do. So much sanding. Each ring also has a pattern of lines, which at first I thought I might engrave before painting. I opted instead to scratch them in afterwards, but hey, this experimentation is all a part of the process. Finger wires next. For this, I used phone cable I picked up at the hardware store. I trimmed each piece down to size and then removed the wires from the core. After that, I marked off the length of the attachment point of each wire to each finger cap, then dremeled down each to a smooth incline to allow for the best fit. Then I, you guessed it here, sanded each one to allow for painting. After dremeling away a little bit of paint on each cap for proper adherence, I used crazy glue to attach each wire to each finger cap. I used a similar method to attach the rings also. Though I redid this part later, again it was by the same process. Here's what the kesh looked like at this point, including with the addition of a thumb loop, also glued on, another feature that I later had to replace. It was at this point I discovered I could scratch in the Goa'uld lines on each ring. So I used this pointed tool and simply freehanded each one on, sweeping away the shavings as I went. This was a very restful process, actually. After this, I slipped the LED behind the resin jewel and covered the back with a layer of 2mm EVA foam. You can see a small hole cut in the center. This is to allow some of the LED's heat to escape. Since the LED is resting on top of 2 silicone rings, there is still a barrier that prevents the hot aluminum from touching my skin, but also allows for it to be exposed to the open air to aid in cooling. Next up, my first design for the ribbon part of this device. Initially, I used the same foam cable, removing the small core wires and replacing them instead with a heavier 18-gauge aluminum wire. At first this worked, so I went ahead and cut, sanded, and attached the decorative Fibra element. Then I could scratch in the designs, a process that ended up being quite ephemeral, as you'll later see. With a certain amount of Goa'uld overconfidence, I thought I was nearly done as I used a small piece of Fibra to attach the ribbon part to the thumb loop. But oh, I was wrong. I was so wrong. But I didn't know that, of course, so I went ahead and made the battery housing. This also houses the crystal that lives on the back of the palm. I made this crystal with resin, which I dremeled into shape. I left it frosted, as this is the look on an actual kesh.
So here's the thing about cosplay. Sometimes you have to redo something, and you'll notice in the previous videos, this looked almost done, but a whole bunch of things started going wrong. So I realized that in order to fix this, I was going to have to do a couple things. Notice on Apophis's device, this actually goes over the top and then the ring goes underneath. So I was able to redesign that because the rings were cracking terribly. The other thing that was happening is the thumb piece that goes around this also snapped. This was a single layer of thermoplastic, so that was a bit of an issue. Sometimes with cosplay, you gotta get a little creative. So the ribbon device is not fitting properly across my arm, which means I do need to redesign it. And in order to do this, I need to be able to sculpt directly onto my arm. Now, this is made a little bit easier in the fact that it would be my left arm. However, it's much easier to sculpt when you have 2 hands available. And also, thermoplastic tends to be pretty hot, and even if you put on a shirt or something, it's still pretty hot and then it'll stick. So anyway, what I did was I have made this very beautiful, ooh, isn't it lovely? What is essentially a life cast of my arm and hand. I made it out of duct tape and then I stuffed it with some spare fabric. So this is my left arm. So I'm gonna be able to sculpt directly onto this. Absolutely not winning me any beauty contests, but this is the functional base. That's better already than it was, which means unfortunately I have to redo this part. And you know what, that's okay. There were a couple things I wanted to change about it anyway, and that's cosplay. You have to redo things from time to time, so yay.
I didn't film the process of remaking the ribbon and rings, but I'll walk you through the changes. In addition to the strengthened core, the actual ribbon is now a 1/2 inch narrower. The thumb loop is also now a continuous piece with the ribbon, as is the case on screen used kesh. Finally, the battery is now indwelling and cannot be removed. This is, however, why I opted for a battery that can be recharged without removal and one that does not overheat. You can also see the very fancy way the electronics are adhered to the inside of the ribbon. Yes, that is duct tape. Duct tape is, in fact, perfect for this. After a few final fit tests, my kesh was complete. As you can see, I'm very pleased indeed. I can't wait to wear her to a convention in all her Goa'uld glory, and this will hopefully be the first piece in a larger ensemble, so keep your eyes peeled for that. Thank you for joining me today, and if you'd care to like, comment, or subscribe, it's always appreciated. But for now, take care, and I'll see you next time.